The Patterson Foundation
strengthens people, organizations, and communities by focusing on issues that address mutual aspirations, foster wide participation, and encourage learning and sharing.
All right, Rich Harwood, welcome to the Patterson Foundation's Beyond the Blog podcast. Thanks for being here.
Andrew, great to be here and great to be at the Patterson Foundation.
Absolutely. Well, you're here in part because we're working with you to promote your new book, The New Civic Path, where we'll be launching some book circles this July 2025 to October 2025. And I just read your book last week. And
better than last night or this morning.
Yes, yeah. So last week, so we'll see how much I remember. But I want to start from the top. Why did you write The New Civic Path?
You know, I came up with the idea to write this when I was on the road for our last campaign, which was called Enough Time to Build. And I crisscrossed the country for a year. I was on the road almost every week. And as I was talking to folks in all kinds of communities from all walks of life in all different kinds of places, first of all, I felt this palpable hunger to move our country forward, but people didn't know how. And I didn't start with this idea of the New Civic Path, but as I was giving speeches and giving talks and doing radio and television interviews, I started to articulate our message in terms of a new civic path. And so while I was still on the road, I started writing this book. And it kind of came out really quickly. And it led to this next phase, which is the campaign for the New Civic Path.
So let's back up for a moment. The previous campaign was Enough Time to Build. And one of the things you mentioned in the book is sort of the dual conceptions of what you meant by enough, which I was surprised by because I knew about enough time to build and I thought it was just enough time to build. But you talked about how there's two types of enoughs or two perceptions there. Can you talk about both of those?
Well, I think there's the notion of enough, we're at an impasse. And I think there's a point, if I remember correctly from back then, of we need more. Right, to say enough is to say that while we've had enough, we want something else. And I think the pivot to Time to Build was an idea that we didn't just need more talk. We don't, there are folks who are traveling around this country. There's a whole industry, in fact, that's grown. I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but there's a whole industry that's grown around this notion that if we just talk to each other enough, we're going to be able to resolve all our differences and figure out a better path forward for the country. And I simply don't agree with that. In fact, I disagree with it based on not something I believe, but based on experience. I think we've got to build, and I think it's time to build in the country. I know we'll get into this more in terms of the New Civic Path, but we wanted to tie together two different ideas. One was to say, look, we've got to stop what we're doing and we need something more. And what is it that we need more of? And what we need more of is we need to build together. We need to do things together. We need to see ourselves as producers and creators and collaborators again, which, Andrew, as you know, is actually part of the American tradition. This is not a new idea. It goes way back to before the founding of the country. So we also wanted to tap into something that people intuitively knew, that people are proud of in our history, while there are things I hope we get to that maybe we're not so proud of, that we need to address, and that it is something that I think at times we have forgotten in this consumer-minded public life and economy, where we lay claim to things, where we want things, where we expect things, but less where we think that we need to build together. And so we wanted to tap into what we believe most Americans already thought, and help people rediscover what's already within us. And the good news is it wasn't very hard to do that. As soon as we started talking about it, as soon as we started to articulate that we need to do things differently, people really sat up, they leaned in, and they said, okay, how do we do this?
So the New Civic Path, it's not just the name of the book, it's also a path. It's a what. So what is it?
Actually, it's a how.
Or a how, okay.
It's a how. I think we have a saying in the Institute's work, how we do the work is as important as what we do. So let me tell you what the New Civic Path isn't. It's not about creating more activities. I think we are activity happy and action deprived in a lot of our communities. It's not about solving new creating new nonprofits. I lead a nonprofit, and I have believed since the founding of the Institute that there are too many nonprofits. It's not about simply creating new programs. I don't think that's the answer either. So what is it? I think the new Civic Path is about how we can turn outward toward one another and begin to see and hear one another, uplift each other's dignity, honor each other's dignity in a society where we give lip service to dignity in this country. It's where we can begin to hear one another again. So that's one thing. Second, I think we need to focus on what we can agree on in a society where we are really well practiced at talking about what we are against and what we don't agree on. In fact, we are really good at that. So I think we've got to focus on our shared aspirations and figuring out where is it that we can agree on some things that we can get moving on. Third, I think we got to get in motion. We have to start doing things, which leads me to the idea of building. We need to build together. Why? Because by building together, we begin to see that we have innate capabilities. We begin to rediscover that we have innate capabilities. We begin to see that each of us has those. We all have something to offer. We begin to see in a society where we feel as though we've lost control, that we have a sense of individual and shared agency when we build things. And when we build things together, we rediscover our shared humanity. That can partially come from talking to one another, but actually it comes much faster and much better and much stronger by building together. And then I think in addition, in the book, there are 7 or 8 dimensions. So I'm just going to mention 4. I think we've got to make visible the change that we are creating together. We face in this country a crisis of belief, and so which I think sits at the core of why we need a new civic path. Right? We don't believe in our institutions. We don't believe in our leaders. We don't believe in civic organizations. We don't believe. Many of us no longer believe in our faith institutions. We don't believe in one another. Heck, someone in New London, Connecticut just said to me, we don't believe in our individual selves. We question our own instincts. We have lots of doubts about what's going on. And I think you have to ask yourself, well, what engenders belief? Part of what engenders belief is proof that things are actually happening. And not just that they're happening, but we're going at them in a different way. We're restoring our sense that we can see and hear one another. We're restoring our sense that we can get in motion together. We're restoring our sense that we, amid our differences, can agree on some things and get moving. We can restore our sense of belief that we can build together. All of that stuff is invisible to us in this noisy, chaotic world that we live in. And I think at the Institute, we talk about making the invisible visible. We've got to make the things that we're creating together more visible to ourselves so that we can restore our sense of belief that we can actually come together and get things done.
Yeah, so one of my questions in preparation for this conversation was, why situate? Because it's one of the first things you write in the book is that we have a crisis of belief. I think it's the first sentence. We have a crisis of belief. And that's a particular choice to root the book really in the foundational problem is this crisis of belief. But what I'm hearing from you is that matters because the pathway is about restoring belief in ourselves and in each other and doing that through action.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the central challenge in America today is not, while there are particular policy challenges that we face, there are particular challenges around, do we think the government's too big or too small? Do we think it's activist enough or not, or too activist? Those are real challenges, and we need to debate them. Do we believe that all kids should be reading all books or not? That's a real challenge in communities, and particularly right here in Florida. But I think that the central challenge we face is a crisis of belief, which is why I started the book the way that I did. And absent belief that we can actually come together and get things done, we find ourselves in a situation where some have told us we're polarized. I actually think there's something else going on. I think there's a kind of fight or flight mode happening in the country today where, absent a lack of belief, we either come out fighting for our own position, our own partisan positions, and we try to win at any cost now, or many of us have decided to retreat altogether from the public square and basically thrown up our hands in frustration, even disgust and cynicism, and said nothing's ever going to change because I don't believe anything can change. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to step away. And so I think what we've got to demonstrate to ourselves, not just talk about, we have to demonstrate it in tangible ways, is that we can believe again. We can believe in one another. And, this new civic path that I talk about in the book, I say, it's not going to begin in Washington, D.C. It's not going to begin in our state capitals. Most significant change in America didn't. Most significant change in America began in our local communities. It's where we can see and hear one another, where we can honor each other's dignity, where we can figure out what we can agree on and get moving. And what's so important about that is through those efforts, we are seeding within society a sense that we can believe again. And that belief can then grow and expand and multiply and spread. And I think that's what we need to be focused on today.
Yeah. I'm curious how we get in motion in that direction, because you're making me think back into one of the early concepts you bring up in the book is the difference between false hope and authentic hope, right? And in false hope, my takeaway from that was that false hope happens when leaders or institutions say they're going to do things and then they don't do them.
Yeah, it could be leaders or institutions. It could be civic organizations. It could be faith-based organizations. It could be your neighbor, mm-hmm. right? And I think we have become very good at promoting false hope. We say that there's a significant challenge in our community like public education or safety or safe drinking water or whatever it may be, that has taken a generation to build and to come about. And we say we're going to solve it in 2 years. We know that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So why do we do it? And it creates a sense of skepticism and cynicism and a lost sense of hope, a false hope about what's going to happen. We set expectations for change and metrics that say we're going to see certain change in a certain amount of time. Why do we set those metrics? Simply to get more money, to get supporters? But we know we're not going to hit those metrics. We say we're going to work on tough issues in our community, and then even if we ever get together, we bypass the hard conversations and just talk at superficial levels. Why do we do that? It creates false hope. We say, organizations and groups say every day, we're going to come together to work collaboratively on this challenge in our community. And then what happens? I can't tell you the number of communities I'm working with where this is going on each and every day, where people basically get together, they have nice conversations, and they all disperse and go home and do the same thing they did before they ever showed up for the meeting, if they show up for the meeting at all. There's a difference between getting together and working together. Getting together in the way in which we pretend that we're working together creates more false hope. So what's the alternative? I think we've got to focus on authentic hope, and that will help us create greater belief.
Yeah, and authentic hope is about actually working together, like you're saying, and it's not just about talking. It's about doing, and as you said, giving yourself and showing people proof that we can do this.
Yeah, I think there are different dimensions to this. Authentic hope, I think, does start with putting the hard issues on the table so that people can see that their reality is actually reflected. They may not, I don't think anyone believes we're going to solve many of these issues soon. What they want to know is that we have them in our line of sight and we're being real about them. There's an old country song, the refrain of which is, I can't see me in your eyes anymore. And more than anything, as human beings, we want to know what matters to us matters to other people. So that's one thing. Second, when we actually have conversations, people want to know, are we actually dealing with the real issue, or are we just going to skate around it? When we deal with the real issue, even though people know we may not make as much progress as we would all hope, that gives people authentic hope. When we, as you were just saying, when we not only get together, which is important, but also work together and figure out where redundancies or duplication of efforts exist, where we're wasting money and could better direct that money, how we can better align what we're doing to what really matters to people in their daily lives. That gives authentic hope to people. When we set realistic expectations for the pace of change, that helps create authentic hope. When we make things visible, proof that you were just mentioning, that creates authentic hope. And look, at the core of this, what I've been saying recently, and I didn't go in thinking this, honestly, Andrew, but it just started coming out of my mouth as I've been talking around the country now. At the core of this is a choice we have to make. Are we going to tell each other the truth? I think I think what people want in our society is for us to tell us, those of us doing this work, those of us who care about community, those of us who believe that we can do better. People want the truth. And I know that sounds maybe naive in this day and age. I know that. I come out of a political background. I ran political campaigns for many years. But sure as I'm sitting here, I think people want it. People are tired of the manipulation. They're exhausted by the lies. They're exhausted by the half-truths. And we can't tell fact from fiction anymore, what's real and what's not real. And I think those of us who decide to tell the truth, yes, it's hard work. Yes, we have to take some risks. And yes, when we do it, I think people will see us as being more authentic and real, and they'll want to support these efforts.
So you wrote in the book, and I made a note to write this down. You wrote that I can seldom tell who is a Republican and who is a Democrat because of the way we've reframed the conversation. Political affiliation fades away. What remains are the things we hold in common and can work on together. And you also write before about how when you traveled across the country, regardless of background and political ideology, people welcomed you enthusiastically. And made me think, okay, what is Rich and his team doing right or doing differently? And maybe one part of it is like you're saying, it's telling the truth. But what are you doing that's allowing you to show up in so many different types of communities in the way that you have?
I think it's starting where people are starting. And it's speaking to people's fears and their concerns and the sense of uncertainty that we face in this country, the sense of chaos, regardless of who you vote for. Everyone feels this way. Most people feel this way now. And I think people appreciate that. I think people appreciate that they're hearing an expressly civic message, not a political one where they believe someone's trying to manipulate them. I think people tell me, I can only go based on what they tell me afterwards. They say, you're one of the first people who have come here to speak, who have told the truth, who are leveling with us about where we are, that there's no easy way out. We're going to have to work at it, that it's going to take time, that we're all going to have to roll up our sleeves and do something, that there's no free lunch here. I can't sort of contract this out to someone else. I think what people are also telling me is that the articulation of this new civic path is a practical way forward, that it's not theory. It's not simply an idea. It's something, for instance, for me, I've been working on for almost 40 years now in our work. And I can point people to the results of this work from different communities. So I think all of those things, and I think people say that the message that we're articulating is an intrinsically hopeful message. And when you juxtapose all the things I just said to the craziness and noisiness and manipulation of our current politics today, no wonder why people are saying thank you for coming to our communities and thanks for engaging us and thanks for being honest and truthful, because the juxtaposition is so damn clear. More importantly, look, we're talking about people's lives. We're talking about whether or not their kids go to a good public school. We're talking about whether or not they have safe drinking water in a place like Flint, Michigan, or Richmond, Virginia. We're talking about whether or not people feel safe walking down their street at night. We're talking about whether or not people believe that what matters to them matters to someone else in their community. We're talking about whether or not people who have experienced hatred and bigotry will get any relief and sense of possibility for moving forward. These things that I'm mentioning are not sort of just the purview of poor folks or people of, Black and brown folks or Asian folks in certain communities. I'm hearing this from people from all walks of life, people who are in poverty and struggling, and people who are doing exceedingly well, who believe something is wildly off in our country. And so I think that's why this message is resonating.
Tell me about what it takes as a person to show up in those types of spaces, because I think there's an incredible amount of like personal, whether it's formation or transformation, to kind of to push through any prejudice you might have or tribalism that can emerge because you feel so strongly about a certain viewpoint and you know somebody else does too. Like, well, how did you get there, and what's your advice to others as they navigate that own journey to show up in spaces where it feels really hard to come together and to work together around shared aspirations?
Well, I think, I have my own personal story that led me to this place that happy to talk about at some point. But I think for all of us, I think that as human beings, we are meant to go together. That, we face an epidemic of loneliness in this country. There are so many people who feel, amid social media where we're so connected to one another, so many of us still feel increasingly isolated and fragmented from one another. We feel as though we have to, some of us go onto social media looking for a sense of acceptance and validation, a sense of belonging, a sense of connection, to believe that we're part of something larger than ourselves. And we end up in these algorithms and end up in these places that we know we ought not to be in, but at least we can find something that we're looking for in our lives. I think we're all looking for those things in some basic way. How do I know that? Because I think that's what all human beings are looking for. That's how we're wired. Mm-hmm. We're not meant to be alone. We're social animals. We're social beings. We're interconnected beings. So I think what we have to remind ourselves of right now is that we can't create the kind of families, we can't create the kinds of neighborhoods, we can't create the kinds of communities, we can't create the kind of nation that I think so many of us aspire to have on our own by going it alone. We need each other. And if you believe that we need each other, if you believe that we've got to go together, then what I would say to folks who are listening to this is, I'm not asking you to solve the world's problems. I'm just asking you to take a step forward, to lean in, to go talk to someone in your family, maybe, who you're estranged from, to go talk to a neighbor, to go talk to someone who you meet at a meeting, to go talk to someone across town, to pick up the phone and reach out to someone. And we just need to get started. I wrote a book called Stepping Forward, and I know I'm not supposed to talk about other books today, but I really do believe that the task for us as human beings is just to take a step forward. Mm-hmm. And once we do that, we begin to gain greater confidence, we begin to greater sense of belief in ourselves and in one another. We encounter challenges, as you're suggesting. It can be hard. But if we stick with it, we can overcome some of those challenges, not all of them. And in doing so, we can keep taking a step forward. And that's really what I think we need to be doing right now.
Yeah, it can feel, and one of the things we talk about at the Patterson Foundation is this idea of smallifying.
Yeah.
And yeah, it can feel overwhelming if it's, let's change the entire world. And it's one of the things I really appreciate about the Harwood approach and what you talk about in the new Civic Path is starting local. And even beyond what I'm hearing from you right now is, you want to start local, but that also doesn't mean you have to change your entire community tomorrow. It means take a step today and then another step tomorrow and move forward.
Yeah, one of the things I write about in the book, one of the, it's at the end, I wanted to put it in because I believe so deeply in it, is in my faith, like in many faiths, there is a teaching. In my faith, it says, if you save one life, you save the world, which I think goes hand in hand with what we're talking about now. And, I always wondered, why do they teach us this? If you save one life, you don't save the world. You save one life. Then why do they teach it? I think they teach it because If you save one life, it means that you've turned toward someone else. If you save one life, it means that you value someone else's life beyond just your own. If you save one life, it means that you value something larger than just yourself. If you save one life, it means that you've leaned in and stepped forward towards someone else, maybe someone who's different from you, prays to a different God than you do if they pray to any God at all, maybe who is from an economic part of our society, maybe who has a different color of skin or ethnicity or heritage. And if you save one life, it means you took an action. Right? You had to do something to save a life. You couldn't just think about it. You couldn't wish it into existence. You had to do something. And so I think they teach us this because also if you save one life, you deepen your own belief in your own innate capabilities to work with others. And, you know, I believe that there's a light within each of us. And it brightens your own light. But, you know, for so many people in our society, their light has been diminished or dimmed. It's been denigrated at times. People have been told not to care. Just take care of yourself. Just worry about yourself. And I think when you save one life, you touch someone else, and maybe you're helping to relight or make brighter their own light. And when you do that, maybe then they'll go to the next person, and then it keeps going on, sort of like what we talk about in our work called a chain reaction. And I think we have that going on in society today, but we need a hell of a lot more of it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm feeling like emotion well up in me as I'm thinking about this, because I think about the number of Americans that likely feel like their light is totally dimmed out or dimming, or it's really, so it's like, how do I do this when my light feels so small? What do you
It's
say?
tough. You know, look, I've worked in some of the hardest hit communities in America. I was called into Newtown after the massacre there in 2012. I was asked to work in Flint after they lost 30,000 auto jobs in a moment. I was asked to work in Youngstown, the same thing, Mobile, Alabama, same, different circumstances, same dimensions. And people's lights were going out. And it just wasn't in the time that some event occurred in many of these places. It happened over not just a single generation, but multiple generations. And people ask, why should I believe? You know, we're back to belief. Why should I believe anything can be different? I've seen all these initiatives come and go. I've seen all these programs come and go. We're back to false hope now. And I've seen all the promises, and they don't amount to anything. Why should I believe? And what I say to folks is, you shouldn't. Let us together produce something that you can believe in. Let us produce something that you can see and touch and feel. Let us produce something with folks in your community where they're leading the way, not some group from out of town leading the way. Let us produce something together that doesn't solve all the problems, nor does it make all the promises that we're going to. But it puts us going in the right direction, a better direction, a more hopeful, more inclusive, more equitable, frankly, more just direction. And then believe. And I think those of us whose light is still bright or hasn't fully dimmed, you know, I think we hold a special burden that we may need to go first. And as we go first, others will see us. And as they see us, others will join. This is what's happening in Reading, Pennsylvania, where we're doing work right now, and in other places. And that takes a while. And we can't expect everyone to come all at once just because we say to them, you know, this is a new thing. This is the best thing since sliced bread. We've got the answers to all your challenges. We know the path forward. You should believe, even though you haven't, your belief has been dashed time and time and time again. You know, we got to knock that stuff off, and we got to get real with folks. And we got to understand that we're engaging with people's lives and their hopes and the failures and disappointments that have come before. And that, I think, is missing too much from the efforts in communities and in our country today.
Yeah, I think that's one of my takeaways while I was reading the book was like there's a profound like humanness to the way that you talk about this. And when you talk about just now, sort of thinking about folks where their light feels dimmed out or dimming, it's the fact that you're saying, hey, maybe it is. And that's okay.
And there's good reason.
Yeah, there's good reason for
You've been sold a false bill of goods.
Yeah.
People have come in here and promised things they never should have promised. And in some cases, maybe we didn't step forward the ways we needed to.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we didn't do the things that we were responsible for. Okay, that's happened.
Mm-hmm.
Now what?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to relitigate the past. I do want to relitigate the stains on our country that began before the founding of this nation. I think, just to be clear and just to say this quickly, we can come back to this, but we have to tell the truth. I think a great nation, we want to talk about a great nation tells the truth about its past. A great nation reconciles about its past. A great nation figures out a new path forward that is inclusive of everyone. A great nation makes good on its promises. So I think that's really important. Other than that, I don't want to keep relitigating sort of what happened in the past with folks. I want to help engender a sense of possibility and hope, authentic hope, that we can actually move together and not just individually. In my lifetime, I'm 64 years old. In my lifetime, we have increasingly moved towards you just get what you want and get it when you can and get it for the price that you can. If you don't like it, you get to return it, no questions asked. We have become consumers at every turn. And I think this is not about go just do this by yourself. As I said before, we need each other. We've got to go together. And this is about how do we come together and demonstrate that we can get stuff done together that matters to us, that strengthens our community, the way in which we function, and that begins to restore a sense of belief in ourselves and one another.
So you mentioned a great nation, and I was struck by there's a kind of through line in the book about patriotism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe you're concluding, or maybe your second to last chapter is about a patriotism of devotion. And it got me thinking about American identity. And that was a particular choice of yours. I think oftentimes there can be a more like global perspective on, hey, I'm going to be a human and I'm going to show up where I'm at geographically. But it's a different choice to say, no, we're all Americans inside this nation, and there's something unique about that. Can you talk more about how you arrived at that decision and a little bit about that patriotism of devotion?
Yeah, first, I think we've become captives of partisanship in this country. And remember, I started my career on political campaigns. I worked on 20 political campaigns by the time I was 23, the last one for a U.S. presidential candidate. So I thought that was going to be my life moving forward. And but I think one of the reasons why I turned away from it and turned toward this work is because we have become so partisan. We think of our identity first as Republicans or Democrats at times, or liberals or conservatives. And we wear these, this is talked about a lot by a lot of folks, but we wear these jerseys now, almost like we're on a sports team. And I think we get locked into these partisan positions which make it impossible to move forward. I think there's something deeper at work in this country, I'll just speak about this country, which is that, yes, we have a partisan history. There's a long history of partisanship in America, and it can be really healthy. It creates a kind of competition of ideas. I believe in pluralism. At the same time, I think we are in a battle about American identity. Right now, you asked about American identity. We're in a battle about American identity. There are some people who I believe, and this is what led me to the notion of patriotism, which I've been writing about now for maybe 20 years, but I think it's become even more important now, that have claimed the flag, and they wave the flag, And they think because they're waving the flag or they put it on their car, whatever it may be that they do. I have a flag that hangs from my front porch in Richmond. So I believe in the flag. But people have captured it in such a way that if you're not with them, you are un-American. That's the rhetoric that we hear. That's the rhetoric. There are others that I encounter in communities all across the country who simply want to trash the country. They want to tell me everything that's wrong with it. They want to tell me everything that's gone wrong with it, everything that is wrong with it, everything that will forever be wrong with it. And neither approach works for me because I don't think it takes us anywhere. I think if you look at the definition of patriotism, actually what it means is love of country. And if you look at love of country, or you think about what it means to love something, to love someone, to love a partner, to love a kid. I just have a new grandchild, to love my young grandchild who just turned 2. It means that you are devoted to that thing or that individual or your family or your community, and that your devotion is so strong that you stick with something or someone even when, or especially when, you don't like where it's headed. That there's a kind of devotion that's at work. I happen to think that most Americans believe in that notion of patriotism. It doesn't mean that we agree on a lot of issues. We disagree on some really fundamental things in this country. It doesn't mean that we all have the same view of America's history. We disagree about our history in some cases. It doesn't mean that we're all clear about where we want to go together into the future. There's some real disagreements about that too. But I'll be damned if we're going to sit here and pretend that because there are people on one side who have claimed the flag and are using it as a weapon, and that's what they're doing. They've weaponized the flag. Let's get clear about it. And then there are other folks on the other side who simply want to trash the country, and they've weaponized that too. I say, fine, you do whatever you want. Like, that's your business. But the rest of us who actually love this country, warts and all, who know that there were some missteps, big missteps, stains on our history, who believe that we can do better and be better, we want to get to work on doing better and being better. And that's a patriotism of devotion.
If I'm hearing you right, this devotion piece, it's devoted to this idea of what America can be, right?
We were founded on a promise. We were founded on ideals. The notion of ideals is that you never reach them, not in human life. You don't reach ideals. You strive for them. And as I've said repeatedly now, this country was founded on sin, on original sins. We have consistently made missteps and mistakes along the way. And for me, I love this country. So for me, I believe that part of our history, a big part of our history, a through line in our history amid all those mistakes and missteps, is that we keep striving for something better. We take 2 steps forward and inevitably we take a step back. You're seeing that on all sorts of issues today. There is no straight line here. It's not linear. Progress sometimes is really fast, and then people pull us back. And we sort of, you can either say self-correct or at least moderate in some cases. And I think that's part of what it means to be part of a society. Now, what I know from working with people all across the country from all walks of life and all different types of places is that the vast, vast, vast majority of people I have met want to work on moving towards a more perfect union, knowing full well we will always be imperfect.
Even if we disagree about what perfect might be.
I don't know how you strive to move toward a greater sense of being perfect without debate. I don't know how you move toward creating anything without tension. I don't know how you move and innovate in ways without recognizing that something needs to be fixed. Like, that's part and parcel of the journey. That's part and parcel of the nature of this great American experiment that we're in. And so for those folks who say, well, I don't like the messiness, I don't like some of the noise, I don't like the fact that we're imperfect still, I don't like the fact that things still need to be fixed, I don't like the fact that we need to innovate, my response is, well, I don't know any country, any community, frankly, any individual who doesn't always need to be thinking about how they can be better at who they are or what they are. That, I think, is part and parcel of being alive.
At the beginning of our conversation, you talked about the difference between the limitations of initiatives that are focused specifically on how we talk to each other, and the Institute's prioritization always of a bias towards action. And yet, part of working together is being able to talk to each other and talk to each other across a profound difference. Could you talk more about what's the balance there?
Yeah. You know, I wrote a different book called Unleashed, which documents how we sought to document how change occurred in fundamentally different communities facing different challenges in different parts of America. And Andrew, in every single case, the change began by folks in communities coming together and talking with one another. Not talking simply about their problems, but focusing on their shared aspirations. Not focusing on the political debate, but focusing on what really matters to people. And in doing that, and not just talking to folks you know, but making sure that we meaning folks in communities, were inclusive in who they talked to and talked with. In doing that, in every single case, and this has been true now for 40 years of me doing this work, those conversations, when done under certain conditions, lead to a reframing of the public debate away from politics and towards what matters to us. That's what unlocks the ability to move forward. So if someone were to say to me, Rich, you're anti-public discourse, you don't believe in talking together, you don't believe in bridging divides that exist, I would say, no, that's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that those conversations alone will not produce the change that people are looking for in their lives, in their communities, and in this country. And if you need any kind of reassurance about that, forget all this talk about the community and the country. Think about your own personal relationships. Think about the fact when you're in tension with someone, maybe a partner or a spouse or a friend or a sibling, and you're at odds with one another. And yes, you need to talk it through. Yes, you want to know that the person hears you and sees you. You want the challenge that you're experiencing to be acknowledged. That's part of human desires. But if you just stop there, let's say you just kept talking, would that on its own change what needs to be changed in the relationship? I don't think so. Mm-hmm. Someone needs to act. We're back to if you save one life, you save the world. Someone needs to take an action to create something different. So I'm all for conversation, but as you suggested in asking the question, yeah, I have a bias towards action. Mm-hmm. Because, and you asked about balance, because I think we've gotten very good at just talking ad nauseum about stuff, and people are fatigued by it. They're tired from it. When we work with communities, they're like, are you going to ask me to have one more conversation and talk about all my concerns? No one's done a damn thing about them. Why should I engage? This goes back to belief. Why should I believe this is going to be any different? So if we want things to be different, if we want to engender a sense of belief, if we want to engender a sense of authentic hope, if we want people's lives to improve, yeah, let's get together and figure out what we can agree on amid our differences. And then let's get to work. Let's start producing stuff.
So my guess is when you wrote this book, you talked a little bit at the beginning about why you wrote it, and it really emerged from your experience on the Enough Time to Build campaign, going around the country. And then you wrote the book, and I'm sure you have an aspiration for what do you hope somebody feels or does or thinks when they finish it. What is that, or what are those aspirations you have for readers of the book?
I start with this letter to your friend, and I want someone to feel that what matters to them has been articulated in this book, that someone took the time to articulate something that already exists within the person who's reading it. And it gives them a sense of that they're not alone, honestly, that they're not alone. And that not only are they not alone, but if they can find a way to get on this new civic path with others, even if it's just 2 or 3 other people, that they can figure out what they can agree on, they can begin to build together, they can begin to make visible those things they're creating together. They'll begin to see that while they haven't solved all the challenges in front of them, they've made a difference. And in making a difference, they believe that we together can make a greater difference, and that we together can help put this country on a better path, not just for some of us, but for all of us. And so that's the hope. And the thing that we haven't really talked about the Patterson Foundation, but the thing I love about what the Patterson Foundation is doing with this book, which it has done with other people's books in the past, including one of mine, but more importantly with other people's books, is that the foundation has committed itself to doing these book circles, because the foundation, aside from anything it does with the Institute, the foundation on its own believes in possibility. The foundation on its own believes, as you said earlier, that if we can smallify things, I would say start small to go big, but if we can smallify things in ways that give us a leg up on them, then that puts us on a better path. The foundation believes on its own in the innate capabilities of people. The foundation believes on its own in a sense of abundance, that if we can adopt and adapt for ourselves a mindset of abundance, we begin to see things in a different way. And I would say the foundation doesn't use this language, but it's embedded in everything that it says, that if we do these different things that the foundation is so committed to, our own light can get brighter, and we can help ignite the light of others. And so I'm really thrilled that we're partnering with the foundation on this, and the foundation saw that there would be a benefit in doing this for this 4-county region that it works in. And I'm very grateful to Deborah Jacobs, the president and CEO of the foundation, who chose to step forward herself and make this happen.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Yeah, and it reminds me of we have many 5s and 3s at the Patterson Foundation, and one of them we call our from twos, and these are cognitive or like strategic shifts that we recommend people and programs make. And one of those is going from issues to aspirations. Maybe informed, I don't know the history of it, by our work with you all for over the many years. And I think as I'm thinking about the book circles as they come up, that's one of our aspirations for what we hope people get from reading the book and from the conversations they have, is that helps them move from issues to aspirations. Because as I'm thinking through what you're saying, there's a bit of a nuance there when you talked about the balance between talk and action and the role of talk in action. It's a question of what you're talking about. You're not talking about issues and sort of relitigating, as you said, issues over and over again. We're actually talking about our shared aspirations. We're talking about the future that we want to create, and that's a big difference.
It's a huge difference. I mean, think about when we do make that shift from issues to aspirations. When you talk about your aspirations, if anyone listening to this, one of the things they can do is ask someone after they listen to this, what are your aspirations for your community? And I guarantee it that they will talk about things that come from their gut, that are actionable, doable, and achievable. They're not utopian visions, nor are they rooted simply in problems that pull us more and more into the toxic cul-de-sac we call public discourse today. When people talk about their aspirations together, all of a sudden they realize that while there are some differences in our society, there are some things we do share in common. And the more diverse the group is, the more you realize that people from a different part of town, people who you thought, people who may have voted for a different presidential candidate, people who have a different heritage or skin color or ethnicity, drive a different kind of car, have a different amount of money in their wallet, in their bank account, that while there are differences and we may have different priorities, there are enough things that we share in common that we can get to work on together. When people talk about their shared aspirations, all of a sudden they realize we move from being a consumer of public life to being a member of community life. We are implicated. And there's something, that's not just it's a feeling. There's also something neurologically that happens to you, right? And so it's real. It's real. And when we talk about our shared aspirations, we realize that there is no one leader, no single organization, no individual who can tackle these shared aspirations or meet these shared aspirations on their own. We need each other. That's one of the great things about talking about shared aspirations. They teach us, as we're creating them together, they teach us something we already know but somehow have forgotten or misplaced or just put to the side, or maybe we don't think it's okay to talk about it anymore. That we actually need each other. And in order to move towards these aspirations, even if we never fully achieve them, we got to go together. There's no other way.
So it's a little funny that we're talking about this book. I don't want to brand it as anti-talk, but pro-action, right? And then this book is connected for us in our 4-county community down here around these book circles, which inherently are about talking about a book. So it's a little funny. And reading books and talking about books is a good thing, and there can be real value there. So for those that are listening to this podcast and they're thinking about signing up for a book circle, or maybe listening to this after the book circles already happened, what are your hope for what happens in these conversations?
Look, I think talk, when done well, leads to discovery. That's an action. Discovery leads to taking a step. That's another action. So if you just simply took action without any kind of real conversation, I think this is one of the challenges in our society, which is we go off half-cocked and we're basing it just on our own individual view. This is what nonprofits are doing every day. This is what government does at times. This is what politicians peddle every day. And so, no, I'm not going to forfeit a claim to the importance of talk. What I'm going to say is we need to talk. We need to discover things about one another. We need to discover what we can hold in common amid our differences. We need to rediscover that we can see and hear one another. We need to discover again that upholding each other's dignity is not something you negotiate. It's a God-given right for being here on this planet and being alive. And that those things are the basis for moving forward together amid our differences. So what I would say to folks listening to this is join up. Time to get connected to a book circle. Time to create your own book circle. Everyone knows someone else. And that person knows someone else. So all of a sudden, you're igniting other people's lights within them. So if you're listening to this podcast, what do they do, Andrew? Call the Patterson Foundation?
Let's see. I got this thing right here. Yeah, you can call the Patterson Foundation. There's also information online, and we can get you signed up to other.
Yeah, so Google the Patterson Foundation. You'll find your website. Go to it. I'm sure there's information on it. And either join a book circle with others or start your own or just start talking to some neighbors and see if they're interested, and you'll get a book, right, from the foundation. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a whole process. But yeah, reach out to us and we'll get you connected.
Yeah, there's a discussion guide you can use.
Yes.
That we created together, and that will get you in motion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of a bias for action.
Absolutely. Well, as we begin to close out the conversation here, I just want to create space. Is there anything else? Obviously, we could talk for hours about this stuff, and there's countless stories I'm sure you could share about your work over the last, I think, 4 decades of this work. But is there anything else you want to elevate before we close out?
Yeah, the only thing I would elevate is I think there are a lot of us today, because of the chaos, because of the uncertainty, because we feel disoriented, which, by the way, didn't start just in the last handful of months. This has been the patterns, the trends have been clear for the last 40 years. It's accelerated, but it's not new. And I think there are many people that I meet across the country who want to give up, or maybe have given up but really don't want to give up is probably a better way to put it, that within them is a desire to be connected to others, to make a difference in the world, to be part of something larger than themselves, to believe that there's some greater purpose and meaning to all of this in a practical way, like making sure all our kids go to good public schools. So that's one of the things you care about. And so what I would say in closing is, don't give up. Find someone else, read the book, find someone to talk to, discover maybe that there's a path you can get on. And in taking that path, you will either strengthen or restore your belief that we can actually come together and get things done. And I think at this juncture in American history, that is the fundamental challenge we face in America today.
Rich, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here for the podcast. Also grateful for our partnership with you all over the past several years, and especially in DeSoto County, where we're working quite earnestly with you all. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for this book, and thanks for the conversation.
Thank you. Great to be here.